Morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation this morning, please type them into the Q&A icon on your Zoom toolbar, and we'll get to them at the end of each presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to the July 30th edition of Crop Talk. End of July already. You can see why a lot of guys are starting to get antsy about getting into the field and maybe seeing what some of the fall crops are looking like. See quite a few combines being worked on and guys doing a lot of checking of fields and seeing what condition they're in. So it's going to get into another busy time of year, but today we're going to be finishing off our series with our diversification centers, and we have James Frey on, and he's going to update us on the Parkland Crop Diversification Foundation, and they're up in the Roblin area, and they have a tour coming up beginning of August here. So James will be telling us about some of the stuff that's going on at their site, as well as tour dates, time, and what to expect on their tour. Also, as crops are starting to ripen up, we got an opportunity to get Dennis Lang on today, and he's going to give us an update on the pea crop and the soybeans, as he's been out in a lot of fields lately doing some surveys on soybeans and probably getting some questions about peas as well. So we'll get a presentation from Dennis regarding I guess what those two crops look like. And then from there, we'll go into the crop scouting panel and answer or have some questions for maybe Dennis or any of the other panel members. So I guess with that, I'll get James to take over the screen, and we'll start with the update from PCDF.
Okay. You actually had it correct the first time, and you corrected yourself away from the correct. It's James Fry. So, but no problem there. I get it all the time. I don't even hear my name mispronounced if it is Frey or Fry. Let's see here. Okay, hopefully this is up. So now we'll give you a kind of an overview, as Lionel said, that we'll give an overview of what's cooking here this year at PCDF, and peak of the upcoming crop tour, which is on August 5th, so fast approaching. A little bit about us. This is the crew that we work with, and actually there's one student missing here, but we've had the privilege of having a really long-term staff here. Some of the people have been here. I've been here. This is my 10th summer at the site, and some of the staff have been here almost as long as I have been. So we've got a lot of experience under our belt. PCDF, you're probably familiar, but it's Parkland Crop Diversification Foundation. Way too much of a mouthful, so we usually just say PCDF. But as the name implies, our goal is to diversify agriculture. So we're one of the 4 diversification sites. So those of you who were on board for the previous specialists presenting on their sites, you'll know this information by now, but the idea is to locate these diversification centers in very different agricultural regions of the province. Ours is, kind of up in the northwest, where, it starts to get shorter season, cooler temperatures, and slightly limited crops. We don't grow sunflowers up here, for example, just because they don't finish out, and grain corn is also kind of off the table most years. In 2025, we're scaled down a little bit from previous years in terms of overall number of projects. We did 60 something projects last year. This year we're doing 40 projects, but the plot numbers stay the same, so those tend to be more intensive projects, which I'll kind of outline some of those. The main project site, of course, is our 3 miles south of Roblin. We also have a couple of off-site farmer growing projects, a couple that needed to be terminated, unfortunately, just due to the very dry conditions. But we are still growing a teff, which is a crop that I'll talk a little bit more about later on, but it's a grassy, it's a grain crop from Northeast Africa. And so we're growing that on 185 acres near Ethelbert, just east of the park, east of Duck Mountain Park. So that's exciting because that's stepping out from small plot research and kind of taking a maiden voyage on some farmer fields. This is part of the quarter section of land that we're working on, and this is kind of a strange image because it's overlaid two different crop years, but it gives you an idea of what the field site is like and what small plot research. A lot of you probably are very familiar, but those of you who are less familiar with what small plot research looks like, this is the bird's eye view. And then if we kind of blow up one block, I guess we could say. What I have delineated in red here is different trials. So those are being planted plots all next to each other in replications. And then those replications allow for statistical analysis and comparison between different plots. So that's kind of the bread and butter of what we do is we put the plots in the ground, and then after the fact, once everything has been harvested and usually there's snow on the ground, then somebody sits in front of a computer and analyzes the data and comes up with some numbers. This is when all the fun begins. We put some seed in the ground beginning in the first week of May. I have a little table there in the corner that shows precipitation. So it's been, as you know, as everybody knows, a very dry year. Where we are, we've been blessed with a number of rains that have come at good times. May was actually surprisingly not very dry for us, although the majority of that rain came early in the season. It was kind of that first weekend in May where we got a big dump, and that kind of accounts for most of that percent normal, whereas actually the majority of May was relatively dry. So we saw a number of our trials suffer because of that. And then the rest of the season has been dry, but misery loves company, and I know that the rest of the province has been dealing with that too, especially in the Interlake where it's been terribly dry for some of the locations. So here I tried to spice it up with a few pictures because I find presentations that are all text-based very dull, but it's hard to get away from listing off things when we're talking about what trials we're doing in 2025. So we're doing a number of winter cereals trials, some standard McVet variety trialing with winter wheat and fall rye, as well as some work with Ducks Unlimited Canada, looking at greenhouse emissions and also looking at different seeding rates. So what we have a photo here is one of our technicians has extracted a syringe full of greenhouse gas that's being collected underneath what looks kind of like a microwavable TV dinner there, but it's actually a little gas collection chamber, which at regular intervals, the gases are sucked out and then injected into these vials, which can then be analyzed for composition later on in the lab at U of M or at the Brandon Research Site. We also have some oats trials, quite a number of oats trials actually. The Parkland is a very good location for growing oats. We really can get some very high yielding oat crops here. So, among things, we are growing the McVet and the counterpart of the Saskatchewan, the SVPG, Saskatchewan Variety Performance Group, I believe it stands for. So that different variety trialing there, as well as some private trials with companies and also with the University of Saskatchewan. So I have a, kind of a standard picture here of disease, and this is always the game every year is trying to figure out, okay, what name that disease? And I'm sure there are people on the call here today who can already get it, but I usually have to Google pretty hard or rely on Ann Kirk to do most of my heavy lifting. Spring wheat and barley trials. Again, we have some standard variety trialing going on, as well as some cooperatives and a trial that, some entries that are being collected to assess for fusarium head blight. And then we've been also doing some we are a location which collects weather data also for some of that work to occur to be able to correlate the incidence of disease in these varieties with the weather conditions that were actually occurring on the ground. Oil seeds, we have quite a number of oil seeds this year, actually. So we're working with canola growers to do a large variety trial. Also looking at a rotational study, which is growing wheat together with a cover crop and then growing canola on that same patch of land. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. We're doing similar to the work with the Ducks Unlimited trial with winter wheat. We're doing greenhouse gas collection with different fertility regimes on flax. That's with Mario Tenuda's group. And we're also working with Verve Seeds to do some looking at hybrid hemp. Many of you know that PCDF and the Roblin site and the Parkland in general are, kind of ground zero for the hemp industry that cropped up beginning in the late 90s. And so some of the new frontiers for that is looking at what is involved in producing hybrid hemp, which is a way to get away from some of the pitfalls associated with male and female plants within that and potentially increasing yield by quite a bit. Also looking at flax seed treatment. That's a project with Manitoba Crop Alliance, as well as looking at some critical weed-free periods, so different herbicide timings and the effect of keeping trials or keeping the different plots weed-free at different intervals. Again, some variety trialing and looking at long and short season soybeans. So, the parkland continues to be an area where relatively fewer soybeans are grown, and especially here in the Roblin area, it's actually quite uncommon to see a soybean field. So this is sort of still, believe it or not, still in the diversification category for our region. And looking at some pulses, we've, of course, lots of pea work, similar to our ability to grow very high yielding oats. We can grow some very high yielding peas here in the parkland. Looking also then at some seed treatment for those peas. That's, designed, and I'll say a bit more about that, to look at some pea leaf weevil issues, among other things. Some faba beans, and then this is now the second year of a lupin variety trial. So I have a photo of that here on the side. And I believe my next slide oh, never mind. I'll get back to the lupin thing. So this is just some quick overview. I think with Dennis on the call here, I won't belabor this too much, but just to point out that whereas, once upon a time, pea leaf weevil was kind of an unknown thing, we can see that year on year, the progression of, I guess if for whatever it's worth, the map gets redder and redder as time goes by. And we can see that the biggest issue, in addition to the fact that these weevils do have a tendency to munch on the leaves, the biggest issue, to my understanding, is that they can also drop down and the larvae end up eating out the nodules of these nitrogen fixing plants, so that, eventually robs the plant of nitrogen and at that critical time when it's setting seed. This is a picture actually to say that the faba bean crops are also not immune to pea leaf weevil. So we've seen quite a bit of notching and kind of joked with ourselves that this is those scissors that maybe you remember from kindergarten that can make the crinkle cut edges, that somebody is meticulously out there cutting crinkle cut on all of the leaves at nighttime. The lupins are another crop that has been fun to watch over the course of the summer. I have learned from Dennis that we're moving away from calling them white lupin and blue lupin and yellow lupin, and using terminology that is better descriptive of them. So this is a little bit hard to tell which picture is which, but in the top left corner, we have the broadleaf lupins. In the top right, the narrowleaf lupins. For obvious reasons, those are differentiated. And then one that is a little bit less easy to tell into those two categories by leaves, but also because it produces very bright yellow flowers. We call those yellow lupins. So it's been quite interesting to observe this new crop and kind of imagine where it might fit within the economic space of agriculture provincially beyond the agronomics. Finishing up here with our list, we have some forage crops that we're looking at. McBet forages, which is published each year in the seed guide as well. We're also working with Ducks Unlimited to look at some hay establishment methods, and I'll touch on those briefly in a second, as well as what we're calling the Living Library with Ducks Unlimited, which is an opportunity to just showcase a bunch of different forage types. So here, very briefly, we'll look at the treatments that we're doing with the hay establishment. This is mostly just to give you a sense of the types of trials that we do, or the when we're looking at agronomic aspects of things, what types of questions are we asking? So, as farmers and livestock producers are establishing new hay crops, uh, typical the typical way of doing that is to use a nurse crop of oats, often at a quarter rate. But we're asking the question, what happens if we put a full rate of oats down with that hay to establish it, or a quarter, or no oats at all, which is the method that Ducks Unlimited is recommending, is to use no oats or no nurse crop. And then looking at different hay rates. So I see I have an error here in my slide. It should actually be that there's a high, a medium, and a low rate of the hay seeds that are being established with that, as well as some startup phosphorus and none. So it gives you a sense then of, all of the plots in the background are some variation on the theme of full quarter or no oats, high, medium, or low hay, and yes or no to the phosphorus. And then we get to share about those results. So this was a picture last year of showing one of the groups that we had at our field day that was standing out in the plots. Something else that we really enjoy doing, it's quite a lot of fun and kind of a break from the usual routine of collecting samples and taking notes, is to bring in school groups. So this was a group that we got in this spring. And, it's just very fun to teach them some elementary aspects of agriculture, about the soil, and, kind of scientific inquiry in general. So it's quite a lot of fun. You'd think that in a rural community like ours, most of the kids already know a lot about agriculture, and that's true for some of the kids. But, not surprisingly, some of them are, what's that? Oh, well, that's a corn plant, so it's a lot of fun. Here I'll speak very briefly on the trial that I mentioned, which was establishing wheat and a cover crop together, and then following that the next year with canola. There's kind of this adage of, if you can't beat them, join them. And there is a lot of discussion that goes on about the pitfalls of a very short wheat canola rotation, and among other things, the potential for disease cycles to build up and that sort of thing. In the Parkland especially, I think all of Manitoba, but especially in the Parkland, that wheat canola rotation is very much the norm. So we've been looking, rather than trying to inject a brand new crop into that rotation, just exploring, okay, if in fact wheat and canola are going to follow each other, can we increase diversity in season? And doing that by growing a cover crop like clover or alfalfa, for example, with the wheat crop, and then those are different options available. For example, terminating, the whole thing, spraying everything out at the end of the season and planting canola into that, or potentially planting canola into what is called then a living mulch in the following year, and asking the question, are there ways to make sure that the canola doesn't suffer as a result of that living mulch? The very short answer to that so far at our site has been that establishing the cover crop with the wheat crop doesn't appear to impact wheat yield or quality at all, and the crop did just fine. The maybe slightly more disappointing thing that we have found in year two is that it does appear to have a strong impact on the canola crop unless that cover crop is very well managed. And so there's a little bit of discovery process still going on, but we'll be talking about that at the field day. So if you're interested to know more about that, then make sure to join us then. I'll say very briefly here that it's been both exciting and a little bit disappointing to uh, see just the impact that the very, very dry conditions had on our TEF farmer cooperations this year. Here in Roblin, we missed rain at the right time early on in the season, so that crop did not establish very well in the farmer field, and we made the decision that it would be best to reseed to canola. But thankfully, in Ethelbert, about an hour and 15 minutes from us, the crop is actually doing very well. So it's beginning to head out and looks like it should yield well. So that's exciting. We'll be following that more going forward. And I'll wrap up here with a plug for our field day. As I said, it's coming up on next Tuesday on August 5th. And unlike previous years where we did it around the lunch hour, this is the 30th anniversary for PCDF. So, it was established 30 years ago, and we're going to celebrate that by moving our field day towards the end of the day from 3 to 5 p.m. And then we're going to have a dinner and live music afterwards. If you'd like to register, there's some tickets that are sold for the dinner. There's no charge at all for the field day component, but there's a $20 ticket fee for the dinner. We'll be talking about. I guess I should have included the itinerary here on the screen to make it a little easier, but we'll be looking at some of the topics that I've discussed here already, looking at some of those pulses, the lupins, and asking questions about the pea leaf weevil. We'll also be looking at hybrid hemp production, as well as a demonstration that we're doing with some nitrogen on some wheat. And then we'll be moving into a session which is looking at cover cropping in the wheat canola rotation, as well as some of the broader questions around soil health and the implications that cover cropping may have there. With that in mind, I thank you very much for patiently watching me and listening to me.
Okay, just got a couple questions for you, James, there. You put up the slide about lupins, and
Mhm.
question was, what are lupins being used for?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that is kind of where I touched on this idea that we're uh, kind of in that discovery process for how they fit best into the economic side of agriculture. We can, it's always easier for crop researchers to answer a lot of agronomic questions and then promote a crop to farmers without necessarily asking the much more essential questions about economics. In other parts of the world, they are being grown in some places as a food crop, but also largely as a livestock feed crop. So Western Australia is a real production hotspot. There's also some areas of Europe where they're producing that. I believe maybe more for the human consumption market in those cases. There's a lot of opportunity for it to fit well into some of the protein sources that we think of. For example, the roquette plant has done a great job of using both the various fractions, but especially that protein to be able to supplement to create food products for human beings. So it would have a good fit there. And as I say, there's just some of those supply questions and every time there's a new ingredient that comes on the market, I think it takes time for it to resolve itself and figure out where it fits best. But on an agronomic level, it looks, I think, like an interesting and promising crop.
I see, Dennis, you have your hand up. Any comments?
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that. So we've been doing the variety trials now for 3 or 4 years in Manitoba. It's a protein crop. It's a high protein crop. That's kind of why the two main companies that are exploring lupin production in Manitoba have been really focusing on it. Higher protein than peas. There's some production challenges, I guess, just learning. That's why we're doing all these variety trials. And not to give a plug for any particular restaurant, but if you actually go to the Bridge restaurant or the Bridge ice cream place in Winnipeg, you can actually get ice cream made with lupins. But even some of the I've had some inquiries from some of the farmers markets. And one company in particular is actually doing some selling of a lupin-based product. So it's for proteins for food in a lot of cases that we're looking at right now. But we're just trying to determine where the best fit is going to be, and it's been a very interesting year. We've learned a lot again. So just wanted to add that comment in there. So
Yeah,
Okay,
thanks, Dennis.
thanks, Dennis. James, another question for you regarding the cover crops. Um, when are you planting the cover crop in the wheat?
In our case, it went down with the wheat and it went down in the same row. So the um, slightly challenging aspect there was to basically split the difference in terms of seed depth, where you can assume that the clover is probably going to like a shallower seeding depth and the wheat a deeper one. In both, in the I guess 4 years, I guess that we've grown that type of a thing. We seem to have hit a happy medium there and placed it all down in the same row, same depth, and had a good catch for both the wheat and the cover crop.
Okay, and the next one is regarding teff. What kind of yields have you been getting and are you expecting in the dry conditions?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've seen it go as high as around 2,000 plus pounds per acre. So that's actually quite um, nothing, quite comparable, I guess, to global averages. We've actually seen as high as 2,500 pounds, but that was in small plots. So I think there's always a slight bump there. But then in field conditions, we've seen as high as again 2,000 as maybe more average would be around 1,500 pounds per acre. This year, it is a good question. I'm not, I'm assuming that it will be lower, but maybe part of that also is that where it did establish well in Ethelbert, they also seeded a little bit later, which was, I think, why it worked for them because they then got really some very good timely rains there. I wouldn't be surprised if it was in that 1,300 pound range, but it's time will tell. Some of that also is going to be how carefully it is cleaned because the seed is incredibly small. So there's a little bit of a learning factor there as far as making sure that you're not throwing seed out with the chaff.
Okay, and is teff mainly grown then for seed or is it forage?
We actually began looking at it as a forage crop, and it is an excellent quality forage. It's not necessarily the highest yielding. Something like a barley green feed crop is going to yield considerably more tonnage than a forage crop, excuse me, a teff forage crop. But in terms of protein content and palatability, it's really very, very good. So we've had uh, some cuttings that, early cuttings that were in the 20% protein and, very, very good TDN. Whereas then we've had, later cuttings as it starts to get a little more lignin-y, woody, and but those have still been high around the 14% mark. So as a forage, it's very good, but our interest really has moved to growing it as a grain crop in the last couple of years because we've just I guess by virtue of, through the grapevine, we've come into contact with a mill that is located near Winnipeg in Headingley, and they otherwise import all of the grain that they mill from Africa. So they are just over the moon to think that this crop could be grown locally and remove a lot of the freight costs and uncertainties for them and it also means that there's a very ready market for farmers in the area who are willing to grow it, to learn a bit about it and grow it.
Okay, so and is it just one variety you're working with, or is it?
We've we've done some variety trialing over the last number of years. Unfortunately, that also was the one of the trials that ended up kind of just getting wiped out by our dry spell here in the spring. So this particular year of information is there's it'll be lost. But previous years we do have good variety information, and as it turns out, the variety that we've been growing on the large scale plots is the has proven to be one of the better yielding varieties. That was a happy coincidence, I guess.
Okay, good. A question here for, I guess, Dennis or James, but is regarding the lupins again. Is someone in Manitoba buying and processing it for human consumption now?
It's Dennis here. Yeah, there are two companies that are working with lupins in Manitoba. One of which is Lupin Platform, and they have been working with a couple of growers, and but the production is still relatively small yet. So it's not, and we're talking, just a few hundred acres right now in commercial production. The other company is more of a research side of things. They've had a couple varieties in the trial the last 2 years now, and trying to find the markets for them as well. So no real there's some small amount of contracting being done by Lupin Platform, but it's just with selective growers at this point. So
Okay,
I'll
well,
I'll just make one tiny
okay.
plug for just what a very attractive crop it is. So I think if there was somebody out there who wanted to grow it exclusively just for a backdrop for like a wedding, for example, that would be a great idea. It's a very, very pretty crop.
Oh, there you go. An off market for something, eh?
Yeah.
Well, James, thanks for the presentation today. That was some really good information, and I'm sure you sparked interest in a lot of people for coming down to your tour. And again, that was on August the 5th.
Correct. 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock.
Perfect. And if you want a ticket for supper, phone ahead, right?
Yeah, that's right. And it would be, I guess I could also throw my uh, phone number out there if anybody wants to jot it down. You could get in touch with me if you didn't get the number, but it's 204-247-0346. You can call me ahead as time as well to get a ticket for the field day.
Okay, and I'll have your information up before the end of the webinar here today. So
Great.
good. Thanks, James.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so from there, we are going to go to Dennis, and Dennis is going to grab the screen here and give us an update on the peas and soybeans being grown in the province right now.
thank you, Lionel. I'm just going to share my presentation here now, and we'll get started. And why are we not? Here we go. Let's go full screen. Okay, should be in full screen now, Lionel. Is that correct?
Looks good, Dennis.
Okay, great. Let's get rolling then. So, okay, so I'm going to start off with, what did we plant this year in Manitoba? Some numbers were up this year. If you look at dry beans, all dry bean types, according to crop insurance, we're at 99% keyed in. We're sitting at 207,000 acres. That's actually impressive. We haven't seen those numbers for a long, long time, actually. It's probably since the somewhere around that 2003, 2002 range, actually, is the last time we would have seen those kind of numbers. The increases that we've seen so far, pintos, that would be pretty much an all-time record at 123,000 acres. That's more than what we've seen in previous years. Black beans, very similar to last year, about 48,000, and the white pea beans are up this year. More selective markets with that, though. We're sitting at 21,000 acres. And then a mixed bag of, kidney beans and cranberry beans, a few small red beans grown this year, and the other dry bean classes, which would include things like pink beans and Otibos, as well as Great Northerns. Round out that 207,000 acres. Last year, we had 182,000 acres, 182,000 acres. So that number is up from the previous year. Soybean numbers right now, looking like 1.5 million acres. That's up. That was kind of expected that we'd see a slight increase over the 1.3 million acres that we saw last year. And field peas were actually up as well, about 184,000 acres. The other pulses that we do grow in Manitoba, fava beans, just over 3,000 acres this year. And lentils, we're getting close to that 2,000 acre mark. Not a lot of lentils in Manitoba, usually somewhere in that anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500. So we're a few more lentils this year, but we'll see how things progress and how they yield in the end. So, okay, we're gonna move on. So where are we at? First, I'm going to start off with the staging of field peas right now. We're in that R5 to R6, or late R5, R6, all the way up to R7 stage. So depending on how much moisture you got in the growing season, we're kind of in that range. Did see a picture sent to me from Jennifer McComb here, out in that Notre Dame area here, and they're not very far off from harvest anymore. So a little bit drier region where those peas are being grown. Not necessarily the greatest thing to see peas this mature at the end of July, but just because of the the dryness. But we'll see how they yield in the end. But that's kind of where we're sitting staging wise right now. So what are we seeing within the canopy this past year with some of the diseases? I've kind of talked about this before, but it's just kind of a review as well. Bacterial blight and microspirilla blight. It's good to know the difference between the two. With a bacterial blight lesion, as you can see here on the left, those lesions kind of are delimited by the veins. And usually you see that in the upper to mid canopy, and sometimes you'll see a bit of an ooze on that lesion as well. Microspirilla blight, it's something that you can control, and growers have been spraying this year. Believe it or not, in some areas that did receive a bit more moisture this year, there was that second application of fungicide applied. And in the drier areas, they only applied the single application. But with a microspirilla blight lesion, typically you'll see that expand over the entire vein. It's usually in the lower canopy is where it starts off, but it does spread up the canopy as well if not controlled. Symptoms with bacterial blight, very shiny appearance. Again, keep this in mind, fungicide is not effective against bacterial blight, so that's why it's important to know the difference between the two. Pathogens can be seed-borne or found on infected residue, which we've kind of proven when we've used field pea straw at our diagnostic school to infect the current crop, and we can actually get that disease started early on, just because we don't have a lot of peas grown in that area, favored by cool conditions, and can be spread by wind and rain, and more prevalent after injury, of course. With microspirilla, those lesions expand across the leaf. Symptoms can be, start off with that small purple freckles, what I like to call, and they eventually coalesce and get bigger and take over the entire leaf. So just to show you kind of what we're looking at early on, here, if you peel back the canopy, you want to look down into that canopy, and you want to look for these small purple freckles as how it would start. And as it progresses up the plant, it can affect the crop. The idea with microspirilla blight is to scout early, kind of in that early flowering period. And if symptoms are present and conditions are suited by using that disease checklist, then going with that first application timing and that early flowering stage is what's recommended. If it's a little drier, you can wait and maybe spray a little bit later. And the idea with that is, if the disease pressure isn't there, it's almost better to wait a bit, because you might be able to get away with a single application, because every field pea crop will have some level of microspirilla blight in it. The later it moves in the growing season, the less harmful it is to the yield, and then in some cases actually will help with dry down as well. So again, just another example of how it would start off here in the lower canopy. Now, this picture here is something that Lionel sent me, and I first looked at it and I'm like, it's interesting. Those pods looks like there's some purpling happening here on the stems and the pods as well. Initially, I thought, oh, maybe it's a little bit of microspirilla, but it's a little too dark for that, a little too purpley. Sent it off to one of the pathologists in Saskatchewan, and she also agreed that, yeah, it's not microspirilla blight. She was asking about maybe wind or hail damage. And Lionel, you had commented there was some blackbird injury in here too. So don't really have a good answer on this one here, but if you do end up seeing this in the field, please let me know. In this case here, if it's probably just the odd plant, it's not something I'd typically be worried about, but it's not something that I've typically seen in the past. Something that I have been getting a few reports on this year is Aphanomyces root rot and just root rots in general in areas where there was some excessive moisture. This is a slide from Laura Schmidt from a couple of years back, where the image on the left is a field that has never seen peas before, and the field on the right is a field that has had peas on it in the past in the last 5 to 10 years. Here you can see large amounts of root rot happening in the field. And whereas a field that's never had it, you don't have that disease really present. What we're looking for with Aphanomyces root rot, here's an example here of what you should be looking for. Initially, you're going to watch some of the low areas and transition areas of dying plants through the growing season. It starts off with that on the lateral roots with a honey brown color, and eventually spreads to the main tap roots, and eventually the hypocotyl will get pinched off right at the soil line. The main root tends to turn black, kind of like what we see here, and in the end, especially under warm, humid conditions, and these symptoms can occur 7 to 10 days afterwards. So what can we do about it, I guess? Well, that's the big question. New growers, no peas in 8 years or more, typically, you're not going to really see much disease on that field. I have seen fields though that were 6 years, or actually 7 years after peas, and it just so happened that on that 7th year it was very wet, and there was a tremendous amount of Aphanomyces in there. So a lot of it depends on the kind of the season you're going to have when you plant peas and how long your rotation should be. So, for example, if you had peas in year 1 and then again peas in year 7, and you had a dry year in year 7, you probably won't see much for Aphanomyces. Whereas if you had a wet year, Aphanomyces could be a lot more present in that field. So it's good to keep really good field records. So this year, if you've had root rot in that particular field, Aphanomyces root rot, what you'd want to do is just make sure that you take good field notes, note where that disease was present in the field. And then when you're coming back to that, you can kind of assess the risk level. There are some soil tests you can do to determine presence of the pathogen in the soil. And I'm not going to get into those details, but if you're looking for more information, you can follow up with me at a later date. Some of the other things you can do, keep that rotation as long as possible. We're starting to see some growers had one comment, some slides sent to me from a grower in the East this year. And it was 1 and 3 year rotation, not something I would recommend in field peas, because especially on the wet year, you're definitely going to see more disease. There are some seed treatments you can use, but again, that seed treatment is only good for so long in the early spring. Rotation is right now a better starting point. Good quality, strong seed vigor. I think getting a really good stand and good healthy stand will help things along. Target your plant stand of 7 to 8 plants per square foot. That's what you want established. Good weed control and both pre-plant and post-emerge. Maybe a little bit of starter and good nodulation. I think keeping those plants healthy and is kind of the way to go. Soybeans, where are we at for soybeans right now? Well, I've started my portion of the soybean disease survey, and a few of my colleagues have also been in the field as well. So right now, we're kind of sitting anywhere from, late R2, but more of our soybeans in the R3 to R4 stage. And when you're looking at the R4 stage or any of the reproductive stages, you're always counting from the top node down. So for example, if you're at R4, pods typically are 3/4 of an inch long at any one of the 4 uppermost nodes on the main stem. Pods are a little bit shorter. There you'd be at the R3 stage. And as far as the the R5 stage, which we're approaching here, is when you open that seed up in one of the 4 most uppermost nodes, that seed will be 1/8 of an inch long. And we're probably going to start to see that probably towards the end of next week, maybe definitely into the following week. We're going to start to see some beans into the R5 growth stage. That is probably one of the more critical stages for damage to the plant, and in particular hail damage. With soybeans, if you do get hail early on in the season, and you lose a few nodes or trifoliates, typically in that anywhere into V2 to V12 stage, there you will see the plants regrow. But once you hit that R5 stage, that's where the yield loss can really occur. Typically, yield losses have been reported as high as 75% if getting major hail at that R5 stage. So those are some of the things that just to kind of start you off. A couple of the other notations. Now I've talked about this on one of the previous crop talks, post-emergent rolling. Something I just wanted to kind of show when we talked about damage during that presentation, we talked about how the plants could regrow. So here's a picture here from one of my fields. And you can see here, this is a plant that was not damaged. You can see here the no branching at all. It just grows nice and straight and got some pod production as well on there. But if you look at this one right here, you'll see that that plant was probably damaged, the main growing point, and it actually started to regrow from the axillary buds and started to branch out. So if you do see that in the field, just something, an observation that you can see that those plants do typically regrow from the axillary buds and what they look like later on. What else are we seeing out there? Well, if you're out scouting your field, you're probably going to see one of two of these diseases in the field. The disease on the left is bacterial blight. And you can tell that by this pale halo around the lesion in the center. With bacterial blight, you'll usually see that in the upper to mid canopy, because usually that's where the some sort of damage has occurred, either from wind or some hail, that type of thing. Not every field's going to see it, but you will see this happening. Septoria, that's a fungus that you'll find in the lower to mid canopy. And that looks a little different. It is a brown spot, but you notice here it doesn't have that halo around it like you do see with the bacterial blight. Also, if those lesions coalesce, eventually that leaf will kind of yellow off. Now, at this point, bacterial blight, nothing you can really do with it, for it. With the Septoria brown spot, there are fungicide products that you can spray for it. However, it hasn't been of any economic significance through our surveys or in the fields this year. Just something to note, that's what you can see in the field. When you look down into the canopy, this is how that Septoria brown spot looks early on compared to what it looks like once it kind of takes over the main leaf here. So again, when you're looking at that, flip the leaf over as well, see if it's on both sides. More than likely, that's going to be a Septoria lesion. Whereas if you've, let's say, see some brown speckling, that's more of a sunburning, and a lot of times you only see that on one side of the leaf. What else are we seeing in Manitoba this year? Not an economic threshold levels yet, but we are seeing some soybean aphids. Economic thresholds for soybean aphids are 250 aphids per plant and increasing. And what that means is that if the first time that you go out, you're sitting at 150 per plant, next time you go out, you're at 250. And that means you have been increasing. So that is the economic threshold. Again, you're going to find hot spots in the field, usually around field edges where the populations are going to be higher, but making that determination and knowing what the threshold is will save you some money in the end, because we're starting to see some aphids in here. This looks quite severe, but that was on a couple of plants where the rest of the field was clear. And this is a submitted photo. What else are we seeing? Well, we're seeing spider mites. Spider mites, typically you'll see that speckling on the top of the leaf, and when you flip it over, you'll see the leaf or the mites on the underside of the leaf. Economic threshold is where you see 20% of the leaves affected. Again, at this point, we're not seeing any economic damage or anything worth spraying at this point, but just something to note. And surprisingly, in the south here, where we've had more moisture, we're starting to see some white mold start to show up as well. And I've been hearing some reports even just this morning from white mold and dry beans. And when this is a good year for white mold development, it's been a little bit cooler. We've the areas that have had rainfall and the areas that have had really dense canopies, it provides a very good environment. White mold development, when it's really hot and dry, you don't usually see anything, but when you have cooler conditions, in that 20-degree range, 25-degree range, and good moisture and dense canopy, that's when you're going to see this white mold develop. In the past, we've had years where white mold has been present in Manitoba. The one year that it was quite severe, we were looking at 2013. And the economic, I guess, level that I've been hearing from North Dakota has been, if you're sitting at 10%, if you're sitting at 10% white mold in your field, that when you would start to see some yield loss. The varieties that we typically grow here, we don't generally see a lot of white mold in it. Where we do see white mold is where the canopy is really dense. And in some years, I've seen white mold in mid-August. By then, that stand is pretty much filled. So the areas where white mold has been present has been in the really dense areas where the maybe stand is, the population is too high, no air movement, and some lodging has occurred. But in 2013, there were some fields down south here that had that 10% yield or 10% plants affected. It looked pretty bad in the field, but in the end, provincially, we ended up with setting a new record at that time, which was 39 bushels an acre. So again, not a huge problem in our soybeans in Manitoba. And areas further south into the US, it is more of a problem. They just tend to grow longer season varieties, and white mold can be a lot more predominant there. I'm going to throw this slide up here because we've talked about IDC in the past, and this is our variety trial that we run close to Winnipeg here. These are all individual varieties that we test, and we finished our ratings again for this year and seeing some very consistent results. But one of the things that I'm starting to see here in some fields and getting few reports from different growers is this kind of pattern where you get into an area where those plants are still showing IDC symptoms. Now, one of the first things that come to mind when I see IDC symptoms or any stressed areas of the field that don't seem to want to recover, I ask myself a few questions. I ask myself, well, how long has that field been in soybeans before? This happens to be a one in 3 year rotation. I also ask myself, am I growing soybean cyst nematode varieties? I have been, so that's usually not a concern here, but it is something that when you do see something like this out in the field, you should go and explore a little bit to see what's going on. When we move into the slide a bit more, you can see here typical IDC symptoms. You see some plants here that seem to go through quite well, and then you see these shorter plants that are still quite yellowing, and this was just taken a couple of days ago. When you examine that a bit closer here, you can see here this necrotic tissue that's showing up. And when you start digging up plants, you'll see no nodulation. So again, what's been happening in this particular instance here is we're seeing, no nodulation compared to something plants then that's from a different field, really good nodulation. Plants are a lot healthier. But in this spot, I think what we're seeing that plant's response is the high salts around that area. The plants, we're seeing this in a lot of different areas, especially on some years. On dry years, you can see the salts affecting the plants even more so, even through nodulation, and that's part of what's happening here. But for the most part, I think what's happening here is the salts are affecting the soybeans a bit more dramatically than what we've seen in previous years. We didn't have those early rains to really affect or really help these plants out. So not much you can really do about it, but just something that we're seeing, and it's more of a salt related issue. One thing that I have been getting a few calls on this year, and this is from our variety trial in St. Adolphe, our herbicide tolerant trial. In early July, I got a call saying that we're seeing some dicamba injury symptoms on some of the enlist soybeans and the conventional soybeans in there as well. When you start looking at those varieties, you see that cupping happening. Those plants have been growing out of it since then. The dicamba injury happened early enough that I think I'm confident that our variety trial is going to be still good yet. I have seen this before in the past where we've had dicamba injury on plants in a variety trial, and that was in the years when we were still growing just Roundup Ready 2s and didn't have the dicamba tolerant varieties yet, but it was sprayed in the area. And that particular case, it was an experimental plot. And in the end, they grew out of it. And it was early enough in the season that there was no loss of yield in those particular instances, being that it's early. And you can see here the comparison of what the Extend varieties look like. So we'll see how things progress over the next little while, but not concerned about these symptoms at the beginning of July. If I saw these things now, these symptoms now, if it was sprayed for whatever reason, somebody sprayed and had some movement at this stage when the plants are potting, that could be a lot more detrimental to the yield at this point. But typically we don't see that unless somebody's, spraying out some summer fall or some that kind of thing. But typically that's not what we're seeing at this stage. And then just a final comment here, just keep your eyes open for water hemp. Some pictures from previous years here in canola and in soybeans. Those tall, lanky plants, if you see those, make sure you pull those plants. Don't let them go to seed. Don't put them through the combine. You'll see all sorts of different stages of those plants at this stage right now. You might see some of these plants here. These are along the field edge of a wheat field. Again, and you can also see the small ones coming through. Telltale sign is look at the stems, feel the stems. Are they super smooth? And if they have hairs on them, then you know it's a pigweed. And then also look at the leaf structure here. You have a pigweed here at the top, and these other ones would be more the water hemp. It's more of a different appearance. If you have any concerns or questions about that, feel free to reach out to myself or Kim Brown. And that's all I have for today, Lionel. There's my contact information, and I open up for any questions that you may have.
Okay, if you just want to leave your slide up there in case somebody wants to take down some of your information, but there has been a couple questions come in, and I guess this goes back to your first slide when you put up the acres. Where are you seeing the biggest increase in acres in beans, and what crops are they replacing?
Well, I guess I think what they're replacing in some areas have been when for the soybeans, for example, in areas where canola has been something farmers have grown in the past. I've seen a bit of a reduction in canola acres there. In dry beans, it's more of an increase in the traditional growing areas. Again, the same probably part of some of the same reasoning. Maybe growers are looking for some alternative cropping and replacing their canola crops with dry bean acres. Not a lot of new growers for dry beans. There are a few, of course. We have some production areas up in the main areas for growing dry beans would be in around Carmen and Treeherne, down in the Morden Winkler area as well, and then moving up towards Portage la Prairie, as I said, Treeherne, as well as the Souris area, and we're seeing some up in the Swan River area. Growers have been growing some black beans and some pinto beans there. So just a bit of a shift in acres. The Pinto number did surprise me a little bit. I was a little surprised that we'd be quite that high, but that's just the way things go. But I think for the most part, we're just seeing a shift away from canola in some of those areas and just shifting into those other pulse crops.
Okay, and at what stage will you notice root rot in peas? I guess probably they're thinking, is it past the point already, or would it have been noticed earlier on?
Well, you would have noticed it all the way through the growing season. If right now, if those plants are nice and green, I wouldn't worry about it. But typically, you can see root rot through the entire season, depending on how much moisture you have and how much stress that plant is under.
Okay, and this one's probably coming from a spot that's a little bit drier than where you are right now. But you mentioned critical time for damage to soybeans. What do you consider the critical time for rain for soybeans?
Right now, if we're starting right now, if you're getting moisture in that at early potting stage, kind of R3, R4 stage, that is really critical for moisture at this point. Now, I've talked to some folks up in the Inner Lake area that is on the drier area, and the first question I ask them, well, how much rain do you have recently? And they say, well, we've only had an inch in the last month and a half, or since spring, kind of thing. And I'm like, ooh, that's pretty dry. And the next question I ask them, well, how do the soybeans look? And then the response from some growers have been, oh, they still look nice and green yet. But they had some of these areas had a lot of rain last year. So last spring and then last summer. So they were kind of surviving on that. But really right now, getting moisture at that, R3, R4 stage as those pods are filling and is very critical. So basically late July, early August.
Okay, I see, James, you have your hand up. You got a question for Dennis?
Oh, I just wanted to ask Dennis if you were trying to prove to us in this photo that you ever were actually a child.
I was. The significance of the picture at the top is my dad bought that tractor in 1976, and that's me. Brand new tractor. That was our main 285. And then about 3 years ago, always wanted another one of these tractors for mowing grass around the yard. And the local dealer had that 275 that was in really good shape. And I tell you, it's such a fun tractor to drive, and it's just wonderful, just like being a kid again.
Okay, and then one more question for you, Dennis, here. It was regarding the soybeans and those pictures, the pictures you showed regarding the kind of the waviness in the field. Question is, uh, can IDC come back?
Well, with IDC, like typically what happens is the plants don't typically grow out of it. And that's kind of why I mentioned the SCN discussion earlier, because we have seen in some areas where the plants are under stress and you know, the IDC just kind of persists all the way through. And that's why it's important to go and investigate and look at what those roots look like to see if you do see any cysts on it. But in some areas, you know, the IDC is because it's a combination of high salts and high carbonates in the field. And the picture that I showed up in the field here happens to be a field that has a bit more issues with that. So what I would probably take from that is moving forward, if you have a field that has high carbonates and high salts, and I would select a very tolerant variety for that particular field and stay away from the susceptible lines or even the higher end of the semi-tolerant. So if when you look at the seed guide and you got varieties that are rated maybe a 2.1, I would probably shift away from that type of variety for that particular field and move it to a more tolerant variety. I think that's just kind of the way it goes. So.
Okay, well, thanks, Dennis and James, for those two presentations. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to flip through a few slides here to complete our session for today. But just a quick few slides here. Winter wheat and fall rye is probably the crop that's the earliest can be harvested. We do starting to see seed color change in winter wheat and the getting into the late soft dose stage already. Probably a week away from fall rye harvest. I know there are some fields that have been swathed in some areas, so we'll definitely be seeing some combines move in this week, probably in fall rye, as the forecast looks like it's going to be pretty good. Wheat or spring wheats. The biggest thing I noticed this week is the tillers on the spring wheat, and especially in some of the areas that are drier, the tillers are small, and so we could maybe see some reduction in yields there. And when you look at our ratings, I think the Interlake is the one that's maybe dropped the most in the condition of the wheat crop right now. Notice this in oats. I mentioned it last week, but we're seeing some whitening in the fields. You look closer at those kernels, and we're seeing some just not good development of the kernels. So we're probably going to see some blasting of some of those kernels, as well as, you know, hopefully not, but maybe some lightweight oats. Peas. These are pictures on the left-hand side that I took last week, where we had a lot of peas that were just nicely developing. Just if you looked, you could find some pods that were starting to fill. And then this was the pictures I took yesterday of the peas, and you could see where we're starting to see color change. Most of the pods are filling, and we're seeing basically pods right full. So we'll start seeing some color change, and dry down is starting to happen fairly quickly. Soybeans, like Dennis mentioned, I think we've talked a lot about them today. So that canola, a lot of the crops are out of bloom now, and we're seeing pod development. We're also some of the early seeded crops. We're going to be seeing some maybe some this coming weeks, and maybe some color change. The tours. Wanted to mention the today is the Passaic tour, or Prairies East tour today. PCDF, as James mentioned, is August 5th, and then MCDC that we're on last week is August the 6th. Contact information. So if you want to go for supper up to James's event at Parkland, give James a call. There's his contact information there. MCDC's contact information the Passaic tour is on today. The crop extension specialists throughout the province. If you've got questions, a lot of us will be on the road in the next little while here doing surveys. So if you got something you want us to look at, it might be convenient for us to stop by. forage and livestock specialists. A lot of producers are getting their feet up. Make sure you do some forage analysis and feed analysis so you know what you have, so you know if you need to do anything to improve your feed quality. A lot of the feed I've been seeing coming up this year has been pretty good. Your crop insurance offices and locations. And join us next week, August the 6th, and maybe we'll be talking about some of the yields and some of the fall rye and maybe some of the early seeded winter wheat. So thanks everybody for attending, and we'll see you next week.